There is a back door to every church. I never noticed that in 29 years of pews and choir robes and Sunday hats. Not until the morning I was supposed to marry the richest man in the state, when that little gray door at the end of the hall felt like the only honest thing in the whole building. My grandmother always told me, love asks you for everything eventually. She just never warned me it would come collecting on my wedding day, with 300 people waiting in a sanctuary that smelled like white roses, and a dress that cost more than my mother's funeral. So before I tell you why I put my hand on that cold metal bar and pushed, you need to understand who I was before any of it, before him, before the suits and the lawyers and a love I never asked for and couldn't seem to give back. My name is Naomi Adeyemi. I make bread for a living. People think you inherit a building. You don't. You inherit the smell of it at 4 in the morning, yeast and cinnamon, and my mother humming off key to a radio that only got one station. I had a real career once in a real city, with a chef's coat that had my name stitched over the heart. Then my mother got sick, and I came home to Marigold Street to watch her die. And when she was gone, I stayed. I traded the white coat for her apron, and I kept Adeyemi's open, because closing it felt like burying her twice. Marigold Street isn't much if you're the kind of person who measures things in money. It's a barber shop where I got my first job sweeping hair. It's Mr. O'Folker's grocery and the church, and kids on bikes that are always one size too small. But it raised me and it fed me. And after my mother passed, it held me up when my own legs wouldn't. Which is why, when the letters started coming, I felt it in my teeth. They came on heavy paper, the kind that wants you to feel small for holding it. Whitmore Group. Generous offer, 30 days to respond. Every shop on the block got one. Rents started climbing for no reason a person could name. Old Mrs. Pendry packed up her flower stall she'd run for 40 years and just vanished, the way people do when they can't afford to stay where they're loved. I read my letter twice. Then I tore it in half and used it to line the trash can under the register. My mother's recipes were born in that kitchen. I was not about to sell their home to a company with a name like a law firm. That should have been the hardest thing that happened to me that year. It rained the day he first came in. He had on a good coat, too good, the kind that doesn't belong on Marigold Street. He ordered coffee and then just stood there dripping like he'd forgotten how doors worked. I asked if he was lost. He said he wasn't. I gave him a cardamom roll on the house because he looked like a man who needed one more than he needed his pride. And he ate it like it was the first real thing he'd tasted in years. He said his name was Cal, just Cal, and he came back. He listened like listening was a thing a person could be good at, and he was the best I ever met at it. He'd sit at the end of the counter and let my grandmother tell him the same 3 stories about Marcus Garvey and never once cut him off. He fixed the screen door that had been hanging crooked since the spring without anyone asking him to. He drove Mama Rose to her doctor's appointment when my car wouldn't start and waited the whole 2 hours and brought her back with a lemon drop in her hand because she'd mentioned once that she liked them. I told myself I was just being friendly to a regular, but I'll tell you the truth because I have never once lied to you and I won't start now. I started making the cardamom rolls fresh on Tuesdays because Tuesdays were when he came and I knew exactly what I was doing. There were things I didn't see. I see them now. The way he'd go still whenever I got going about those Whitmore vultures and their letters. The way he always paid in cash. The way he flished just a little like a man hearing his own name said wrong. I should have asked his last name. I think some quiet part of me didn't want to know it yet. He helped me prep for a catering job that could have saved the whole quarter. 150 people, a venue downtown, the kind of gig that keeps the lights on through a slow winter. We worked through the night. He learned to pipe icing badly, and I laughed until I couldn't breathe. And somewhere around 5 in the morning, with flour in his hair and the city going gray-blue outside the window, he looked at me like I was the first true thing he had ever seen in his life. I kissed him before my brain could file a complaint. There's a kind of tired you only get from working all night next to somebody you're falling for, where your hands ache and your face hurts from smiling, and you would do it all again tomorrow. He told me about his father that night between trays, A man who'd built something out of almost nothing and had a conscience the size of a cathedral, and who died young enough that the money outlived the conscience. He told me he'd spent his whole life feeling like a guest in his own name. I told him about my mother and the apron, and how some mornings I still set out 2 cups. We traded our dead like that, careful, the way you hand someone a thing you can't replace. That was the happiest I'd been since I lost her. I want that on the record, too, because of what came next. The city scheduled a community meeting about the Marigold Street redevelopment. I went to fight. I had my notes, I had my neighbors, I had a righteous head of steam. And then the developer took the stage to address our concerns, and it was him, Cal, in a suit that cost what I made in a season, standing under a banner with that law firm name on it, Caleb Whitmore, the face of the thing that was killing my world. The man who fixed my screen door evaporated right in front of me, and in his place was a name I had cursed across my own counter. Every neighborhood has a story about the day the truth walked in wearing a $4,000 suit. This is mine. He saw me in the 3rd row, and the color left his face, and I stood up, I don't fully remember standing, and I took him apart in front of everyone I loved. Calm, quiet. I gave him nothing to hold on to. I told that room exactly who he was, and exactly what his company did, and exactly what we were worth to people like him, which was a line on a spreadsheet. I did not cry. I want that on the record. I waited until I got home. He came to my door that night in the rain again, because of course it was raining, and the thing he said was the reason any of the rest of this happened, so I'll give it to you the way he gave it to me. He said he'd been trying to save us from the inside. He pulled out papers, real ones, showing he'd been quietly routing his own money to slow the demolition, drawing up a plan for a community land trust that would put the block in the hands of the people who lived on it. He'd been fighting his own board for a year, and he'd hidden who he was because the day he walked into my bakery soaking wet, he was just a man who wanted for 1 hour to be liked for something other than his last name. "That's not an apology," I told him. "That's an excuse with paperwork." He said, "You're right," and he left. I'll be honest with you. The paperwork was real, and that mattered. But a coward dressed up in good intentions is still a coward, and I made him learn the difference the long way. Weeks of it. He showed up early and stayed late, and never once asked me to forgive him faster than I was ready to. He let me be angry. That, more than the money, is what eventually thawed me. That a man who could buy almost anything understood there were things he had to wait for. When I finally let him back in, he didn't bring roses. He brought a folder of land trust documents with my neighbors' names already on the deeds, and he asked me to help him build it right. So I did. And then he asked me to meet his mother. I have stood in kitchens at 6 in the morning with a busted oven and a wedding cake due at noon. I do not scare easy, but Eleanor Whitmore poured my tea in a house with more marble than the courthouse and asked me 3 soft questions about my people, and I understood I had walked into a war I didn't start, in a house with no back door. She never raised her voice. People like that don't have to. The whole evening was an audition I was never meant to pass. She asked where I'd studied, with a little pause before the word, as if a bakery counter couldn't possibly count. She asked twice how I planned to adjust to the houses, the names, the rooms, and there was a society girl named Vivian paraded through the parlor like the right answer to a test I'd already failed simply by walking in with the wrong last name and the wrong face. None of it was ever said out loud. It didn't have to be. The whole house was set to a temperature that meant you do not belong here, and Eleanor smiled the entire time. Caleb's sister, Maggie, found me by the coats on my way out. She was the only warm thing in the place. She said, "She'll never allow it, and she fights dirty. Be careful." I thanked her, and I meant it.
Caleb proposed 2 months later, not with the spectacle his money could have got, no helicopters, no jumbotrons. He did it at the bakery at closing, with my mother's photograph on the wall behind him and flowers still on his sleeve. He got down on one knee on the same floor where I learned to braid challah, and I said yes before he finished the question. For a little while it was just joy. I am allowed to have had that. We both were. Then his mother got hold of the wedding. She turned my day into a corporate event, froze me out of my own guest list, hired people to manage me like a liability. I told myself I could survive a fancy wedding for the man I loved. I almost made it, too. The night before, I went looking for a quiet hallway to breathe in, and I found Eleanor instead, behind a half-open door, talking low with a man in a gray suit who turned out to be the family's lawyer. They didn't know I was there, and that is how I learned the price tag they had pinned to my dress. They hadn't forbidden the wedding. That isn't how people like that fight. Instead, they'd built a machine. There was a family trust and a clause inside it, written so that the moment Caleb married, and I'm quoting the lawyer here, outside the family's interest, control of Whitmore Group would pass straight to the board, and the board had already voted. The land trust would die the day after my wedding. The Marigold Street demolition would be fast-tracked. The bakery, the barber shop, Mr. O'Focker, every family on that street. Marry him, and I would lose the power to protect a single one of them. My happiness was wired on purpose to my whole community's destruction, and I was the only person in that house who could read what it actually said. I stood in that dark hallway a long time, and by morning I knew there was only one thing I could do, and that it was going to break both our hearts. Which brings me back to the gray door. Brides are supposed to be carried over thresholds. I went out the back of a church in heels I could not run in, holding the only honest decision left in the whole rotten arrangement. I left him a note on bakery stationery in my own handwriting, and I want you to understand, I lied in it. I took the blame. I let him believe I'd gotten cold feet, that I couldn't do it, that the world he came from was too much for me. Because if I told him the truth, I knew that man, and he would set his own life on fire to keep me, and I loved him too much to hand him the match. I didn't run because I doubted him. I ran because I finally believed in him too much to let him pay what they were charging. Deja drove the getaway car with her wedding hat still on, and Mama Rose, my grandmother who taught me everything I know about bread and most of what I know about courage, she held my face in both of her hands at the back door, and she said, "Your mama ran toward harder things than a rich man, baby. Go." So I went. He found the note. He read it. He thought I left because I didn't love him. He had no idea how wrong a smart man can be. Here's the part I didn't see, because I was in the back of Deja's car with my mascara running. Maggie went to her brother. Maggie told him everything, the clause, the board, the trap his own mother had built around the both of us. She told him I hadn't run from him. I'd run for him, and for a street full of people he'd never even met before he wandered into my shop out of the rain.
And my Caleb, the coward who'd learned how to wait, who'd learned the difference between an apology and an excuse, he did not try to be clever. He didn't try to keep the empire and the girl. He understood, finally, that you cannot. He walked into a boardroom full of men who'd been managing his family's money since before he was born, and he resigned. He signed away the inheritance, the title, the trust, all of it, handed it over with both hands. And on his way out, he gave the whole scheme to the press, the clause, the vote, the plan to flatten Marigold Street. He lit up his own family's name like a flare so the whole city could see what they'd been doing in the dark. His mother offered him everything to stay, the company, the fortune, the name, Vivian, a future polished to a shine. He told her, and I only know this because Maggie told me later, crying, He told her that a family that asks you to set fire to good people isn't one worth keeping. Then he walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes he came in wearing and a folder full of papers signing it all away. He found me at 4 in the morning. Where else? Flour in the air, one station on the radio, my mother's photo on the wall. I heard the screen door, the one he'd fixed, and I turned around and there he was, soaking wet again, because some things about a person never change. I've replayed what he said 1,000 times since. He stood in my mother's kitchen and he said, "I didn't pick you over my family. I picked who I want to be. And it turns out the man I want to be is standing in your kitchen at 4 in the morning. People want to know how it ends, like it ends, so I'll tell you the honest version because you've earned it. We are not rich. He gave that away with both hands and never once looked back. By burning it all down in public, he did the one thing the quiet inside man could never do. He made the city watch. The land trust held. Marigold Street is still standing, and it belongs to the people who live on it now in writing, where no claws can reach it. I'm the one whose name leads it. That was my condition, and he didn't argue for a second. He works the back office. He's good with the paperwork. He likes it back there. We didn't have the big white wedding. We had a backyard one on Marigold Street in the summer, with Mama Rose officiating in a hat you could see from space, and Deja catering, and the whole block in folding chairs. Mr. O'Coffer cried, the barber cried, I cried, finally, the good kind. My grandmother was right. Love asks you for everything. What she never told me is that sometimes you have to run toward it, out a back door in shoes you can't run in, and trust that the right person will figure out how to follow. He left a dynasty to stand in my kitchen. I left a wedding to save his soul. And we met back here, where the bread still rises at 4 in the morning. And that, finally, was honest.